Well, I see the counter up there, so I guess that means it's go live time, right?
It is go time. And looky there, right on cue is Jill Hines. That is absolutely perfect, Jill. So I've got Jill over in the guest room, so we've kind of got her muted for now. We'll deal with that here in a minute. But yes, we are live. We are both sliding into home plate here literally at the last second and really
You,
have no idea what we're going to talk about other
you,
than we've got Jill on.
you said that we have her muted. I
Hmm.
think we might be the only people that are capable of doing that.
Hey, we are suppressing and censoring her, but not deplatforming yet. Ha ha! She can't even respond. I'm sitting here watching her in the little monitor screen. She can't even respond back to us yet. Well, I guess she could in the
I'm,
comments, so she could always get us there.
I guess we're like the Facebook Nazis or the former Twitter Nazis or whatever they call them. I guess we're in that league now.
It's our show. By golly, we can do what we want to on our show. Well, sort of. Anyway, speaking of platforms, we'll show here in a little bit when we come back from the break. But I can talk. Tucker Carlson is apparently back. He has just released another video on Twitter, short one, and kind of teased out some stuff. So that's kind of interesting. And speaking of platforms, we're of course streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Rumble picks up our videos about a 24, 36 hours later. So we're also on Rumble. So if we ever get deplatformed, we will be somewhere that hopefully folks can find us. Oh, yeah. And I generally release the podcast, the audio only podcast, the night of the show or the next morning.
All right, well, let's get this break out of the way and let's get our guest on here because I know she's got a lot to tell everybody because
I
there is
would
a
agree.
freaking lot going on.
Yeah, so let's hit the countdown, folks. Y'all know the drill. Grab some popcorn, grab a stiff drink, text, tag some friends. Heck, even go old school and call them if you want. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Let's do our countdown now.
Just helpless, they don't feel heard, they have nowhere to turn.
In all honesty, we try to lay low a little bit because of the fear that we would not be able to camp there.
And I titled it A Shot Across the Bow of the Good Old Boys.
Hello, everybody. I don't think I've ever done a video before on here, but yeah, I wanted to tell y'all what frustrates me a little bit about permits.
Cockroach of the week is, drumroll please, Allie Feaster Smith.
We can't be apathetic about what's going on in our state. We have to all pull up our bootstraps and get on top of this. So you're right. There's a problem out there. I mean, and man, you can see it everywhere.
Well, look, we have allowed government to become our wherewithal to everything.
Well, I've not heard my name in stable or Baton Rouge in stable in the same sentence in a long time.
You're about to be killed by a Zamboni, or you're gonna die in 5 minutes.
This Bossier Watch live broadcast is brought to you by David B. Womack for all your contracting and construction needs. The Outdoor News, fishing and outdoors for our area. Acadiana Mortgage, over 23 years in the mortgage business. Pelican Training and Consulting is an IWTP customized training provider with over 25 years of success to show for it. Call them for a free consultation today. Pelican Training and Consulting matches employers with 50-plus employees with training dollars. Smarter Geek, making technology easier. And the many supporters, donations, and folks sharing information and watching out for Bossier. Now, grab your popcorn and a drink. Here we go. Well, let's see. So we don't awkwardly talk to our guest in the green room, give me a second here. Let me switch and let me do the magic of these little clicky things here. And presto, hey Jill, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. Now, I have to apologize first because I had our little promo deal, scheduled for Jill
Yeah.
Sessions. I had the wrong Jill. And in my defense, Duke and I did talk about Jill Sessions at the PEC meeting, and we led into the conversation that Jill was going to be on and she was involved in some lawsuits. And I thought, that's interesting. Well,
Yeah.
so I owe you a little bit of an apology. You are
No.
an absolute wonderful guest and always interesting to talk to.
Oh, well, thanks so much. Well, it's funny because I know Jill Sessions. My mom used to do her hair for
Oh, really?
years.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I used to chat with her all the time in the beauty shop. So she's a great Jill to get
Yeah.
confused with me.
Right. Jill here, Jill there, whatever,
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so, Mr. Lowry, I know you have been conspiring with Mrs. Jill Hines. What are we going to talk about tonight? What have you two got? What's up?
Look, I don't know about conspiring, if that's how I would describe it at all, but I'm sharing notes, maybe.
Yeah.
There you go.
And she does a lot more sharing than I do because, I mean, this girl right here, guys, she has got it going on. I mean, lawsuits that gain national attention. I'm glad that you'll even come on and talk to us.
Yeah, I'm excited to join you guys, and it's so funny because I think you guys will get a kick out of this. I was at the Capitol today. By the way, I'm in my business partner's spare bedroom because I'm down in Baton Rouge. I'm not at my dining room table tonight. But I was sitting up in the balcony at the Capitol. I had my laptop on my desk. I was doing some, my laptop on my lap, doing some work. And this gentleman leans over and he goes, "Are you Jill Hines?" And he showed me your promo picture of me. He said, "You're going to be on the Bossier Watch tonight."
Really?
So Sean Cheatham, hello.
Yeah, you're now infamous with the rest of
Yeah.
us. Infamous, by the way.
Yeah, for sure. But it was Bossier Day, at the Capitol. So there was a lot of Bossier folks up there. And so Sean reached over and introduced himself. That was nice.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we're glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to talk about, I mean, look, you were a part of what we thought might be the biggest lawsuit in the history of our time.
Right.
Now there's an even bigger lawsuit out there. I think it's
Right.
bigger. Do you think it's bigger?
It's pretty big because we're not going after, the government this time. We're going after some private entities that colluded with the government. And, we're talking about some really strange people on their, we were talking earlier about people and their thought processes and how strange it can seem to us normal folks, right?
Right.
But these individuals, have a really strong vested interest in controlling the narrative. And it's affected, our business, our purpose with Health Freedom Louisiana. And so I was approached by one of the attorneys that facilitated the other lawsuit that I'm a part of, Missouri v. Biden. And he asked if I would be interested in being a plaintiff in another lawsuit. And he explained it to me, and I was like, yes, because I'm familiar with the individuals that are involved in what's called the Virality Project and the Election Integrity. It's not project, it's something else, EIP. But I'm familiar with it because of all of the information that's come out through the Twitter files, Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi, their efforts to kind of uncover all of this information through Twitter. And so I think it was Michael Schellenberger that has done an article on Renee DiRista. She's one of the named defendants in the lawsuit. And she's a strange bird. She has some really strong opinions on vaccines. And so she has really kind of facilitated the censorship in regards to the vaccine conversation with, I think she's a part of the Stanford Internet Observatory gang of censors. That Michael Schellenberger shared in his article that she was also a former CIA employee. You know, because there's a lot of commingling of former government employees, especially amongst the CIA and FBI, in social media platforms, Google, Facebook, in Twitter before Elon Musk took over. But it turns out they're in these private organizations too. She's at the Stanford Internet Observatory, which is, you know, part of Stanford University. But she was a former CIA employee. So, and you know, the saying goes, you know, once you're CIA, you're always CIA. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
That's interesting to me because, you know, we've kind of battled back and forth a little bit over my definition of censorship and all that. And that, you know, I feel that any private platform has the right to suppress you all they want. Right. But where I draw the line is just what you said, where there is a commingling of the government, to put it nicely, and collusion and whatever else is going on. So educate me a little bit on, you know, it's one thing, and we can all wink and nod about once CIA, always CIA, which I agree with. But, you know, are they former CIA employees? Like Edward Snowden could be considered a former CIA or was it NSA? Anyway, he could be considered a former employee, but I don't think that his employment with a particular company would lean towards, you know, helping or colluding with the government. So maybe kind of clarify for me and for everybody watching, if you can, what the commingling or the collusion with the government and these private organizations has been. What does that look like?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, they established like the misinformation and the disinformation guidelines, like what they determined to be misinformation came from these entities. They conveyed it back to it's so convoluted. They conveyed it back to certain state entities, federal entities, and then it transferred over to the social media platforms. So they kind of developed the talking points, if you will, of what is acceptable to say and what's not acceptable to say, and then established like they would send them posts of what would be acceptable, set those in algorithms, and if it came up, like if you mentioned a vaccine injury, for example, or if you had a vaccine injury story, those were the entities that kind of developed whether or not those were true or not.
Or you simply said, look, don't go take the jab. Do not do that to yourself. And then all of a sudden you saw your Facebook post fall off till you might have one that goes through.
Right, exactly.
And then somebody would say to Rex, I'm being censored. And Rex would say, oh, dude, just calm down. You're not being censored.
Yeah.
Well,
and so
but you say that, and so if if it can be proven, and it appears y'all have, Joe, so I'm not disputing that at all. But if it is proven that the government is censoring it, most of us think of the classical definition of censorship as something that the government tries to suppress by force. In other words, you're not going to say this or we're going to put a bullet in your head. Forgive the phrase, everybody. That's what most of us traditionally think is censorship, or, you know, what we've seen in Russia or China, or pick your, you know, communist type country or socialist type countries. But this is a little bit different, but it's the same in principle. And our friend Greg Bell just said, you mean commingling like DA Marvin did and banning me from the official Bossier Webster DA page? Yeah, it's basically the same thing.
That's a tad bit different, because if I'm not mistaken, there may be a state law about elected officials not being able to, remove people from a public Facebook page. Like if that's his elected official's Facebook page, then he may not be able. So there may be a state law that prohibits him from doing that. Yeah, it's I think a little bit different scenario. This is really just kind of okay. So you guys know I've mentioned this. Hang on, I'm trying to find myself in the center here. I've mentioned this in the past, that I really think that, for example, the whole COVID narrative was a setup to kind of overthrow our country through the 2020 election. So don't discount me.
No,
I'm
I'm not discounting that.
Yeah,
you said something a while ago. I want to come back to it real quick. And you were talking about what these people were trying to do. And I wanted to interrupt you then and say, these people are out to destroy the country, because the people you're going up against, you're talking about the Atlantic Council. I mean, we're not talking about people who have the best interest of the United States. And I wanted to ask you then, do you have somebody guarding you, watching you? You should.
No, I don't. But I'm kind of small fry in all of this. In the most recent lawsuit, it's myself and Jim Hoft from the Gateway Pundit, and he, of course, has so much more to lose than I do. Business wise, because this is his business, is getting out. Publishing the truth, quite literally publishing the truth, because he has, a news outlet. And of course, we're, heavily invested in getting the truth out to individuals, engaging them in the political process. So I see my First Amendment infringements twofold. Not only is my speech suppressed, but it's also kind of disabled me from engaging in the public process. First Amendment also provides us the opportunity to petition our government. And if we're literally silenced in a certain way, now Rex don't, it's not the bullet in the head or whatever, but, if you consider Facebook or Twitter, whatever it is, to be like the town square, it's not just that our voices are suppressed, but we're labeled. Our information is labeled like misinformation. So that's taking a shot at my integrity, if you will, and kind of lowers my worth, if you will, in regards to what I have to say. Is it valid or not? So there's so many levels of how this has affected us, especially over the last 3 years. But yeah, as far as worrying about my safety or whatnot, I'm small fry in all this. The lawsuit, Missouri v. Biden, we have, Doctors Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff, and Aaron Curiati, and again, Jim Hoft. So I'm just little old me over here.
No, but you're hanging out with some pretty decent sized fish,
Yeah. It's very surreal. And actually, through my acquaintance with Dr. Bhattacharya through the lawsuit, I have, been able to reach out to them and ask for, video support, video testimony in support of one of our bills that's going to be heard this week. So it's afforded me a little bit of contact that I would have never had before. But no, I'm not too worried about my safety. I do worry about, our country and how we're going to kind of come out of this. I still see people that have been affected by a lack of accurate information, if you will. You still see people wearing masks. I don't know.
Did I see correctly, and you'll know this, did I see where there maybe is a school board in Louisiana that was still pushing vaccines? Is that
A
accurate?
school board. Now, the school boards are still pushing like the regular shot schedule. I'm upset with some of them because they're not giving, the exemption information, which
That
to
was
me
it.
is, yeah, I have a really hard time. There's several school districts that are egregious violators of the state law. My school board over in Lincoln Parish, for example, is awful about sending out, your child is required to have this. They're not going to be able to attend school if they don't have this. The most recent was a robo-text letting parents know that kids are going to now be required to take the Hep A vaccination, which, if you know anything about Hep A, it's not communicable in schools, foodborne illness, usually from contaminated food sources, but they're going to start enforcing the Hep A requirement. So they sent out a robo-text informing parents of that and literally included a link to local vaccination providers, but made no mention of the exemption option for parents. And the next text I received was from a friend who's was in contact with another parent, and the parent went right on out and got the vaccine for her daughter, thinking that she wouldn't be able to attend school without it. And in my opinion, that is an egregious form of medical coercion. You should not be coerced into any kind of medical procedure, much less, in lieu of a public education, So,
Well,
yeah, we're having problems with that.
so speaking of that, Duke, were you alluding to the Twitter video from Health Freedom Louisiana showing the lobby? I guess she's a
Now that was
bureaucrat or whatever.
yeah, now that was another conversation. I think they're two separate issues, but yeah, I got a bone to pick with Law B as well.
Well,
Yeah.
shall we go ahead and roll that video now?
I think we should.
All right.
Now, wait a minute. You know what?
Okay.
A lot of people, now Jill does, but a lot of folks watching this show, they may not realize who Lobby is. I have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Lobby is the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, and it has a history of being the organization that represents the interest and promoting business interests of Louisiana. I'm going to tell you, I don't think they represent the interest of business in Louisiana anymore. I think they represent the interest
careful.
of special interest. I'm going to say it,
Be
and I can
careful
tell you
there.
this. Hang on, I'm going to go on and say it. They damn sure don't represent the interest of small business in Louisiana. In fact, I'm going to stop right there. They do not represent the interest of small business in Louisiana.
You're going to have all the Republicans in the state of Louisiana mad at you, Duke, if you continue on. I would also say that they're famous for bringing or pushing Common Core on us as well in the state of Louisiana, by the way.
Not Lobby. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, so I've got a report that we're breaking up a little bit. I'm going to listen to the phone here and make sure. Do we want to go ahead and roll this video, or do we want to wait a little bit, Duke?
Let's roll it while you check the audio.
Okay, sounds like a plan. So here we go. Let's hope all this audio works.
And members, my name is Mary Beth Hughes, representing LABI, and I will keep this very brief. We oppose any legislation that works to eliminate, alter, or undermine the school vaccine schedule as outlined by LDH. Louisiana law already provides that a parent or guardian can request an exemption to any and all vaccines required. And it's worth noting that this committee just passed a bill to expand communications about these exemptions. We don't want to, and I also want to note, if the COVID vaccine is added to that list by LDH, the same exemptions will apply. We don't want to create the precedent of the legislature making these decisions rather than LDH. Lobby opposed similar legislation last year regarding vaccine mandates and vaccine prohibition, and we are opposing HB 182. Thank you.
Chairman, I just wanted to ask the Lobby representative.
All right.
I'm just unclear on something.
Wait,
because
this
it
is the good
sounded
part.
like you were telling us that LDH was the one in charge and not the legislature. So if we're here to make the law, you guys are telling us that we have to follow LDH, the bureaucrats, or the bureaucrats have to follow us. Which would it be?
That's not what I was saying. I was
Tell me
just
what you said again, because you kind of sounded like you were saying that LDS runs the show and we follow them.
Well,
Help me
LDH,
understand that.
The guidelines put forth through LDH, Lobby's been very consistent in our position that the legislature should not be making those rules, that LDH should put those guidelines forward. And once again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to argue about the COVID vaccine.
This is a law. We're proposing a law
Right.
that supersedes any rule or any bureaucracy.
The Lobby representative, I understand in principle Lobby's position, but Lobby has been taking that position for at least since the pandemic. And this bill specifically deals with students. Whether it's daycare through college, it's still students. It's not employers, it's not employees. And yet Lobby is an organization that does what?
We represent employers from all over the state.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
I'll pause it right there. That's great.
I love
let,
Farrell
let,
today.
let Jill bring Jill back up and let her have at this.
Yeah, yeah. So, kind of break that down for us, Jill. I mean, what is going on there?
Well, first of all, I want to make that my ringtone. Like, that needs to be on repeat. I love that so much. And really, there's more to come with Chuck Owen, Representative Owen. But it was beautiful because why is Lobby in the Education Committee worried about what vaccines are required for school attendance? And they have opposed, this is not the first, they have opposed pretty much every piece of legislation that we have endorsed over the last 3 sessions, legislative sessions, including the first one back in 2020 when we supported Representative Danny McCormick's legislation to prohibit a COVID vaccine mandate, employee mandate. And they actually I went back and watched the testimony. They submitted a red card in opposition to legislation that would prohibit a COVID vaccine employee mandate. And so, but why are they in the Education Committee? Why are they worried about what kids are, being required to attend schools? I'm so thankful that we have such a good bunch of conservative Republicans on that committee that are willing to kind of take Lobby on, because it's a huge lobby.
But wait, Lobby is supposed to be the Republican conservative, group that I mean, what is everybody going to do that they're not going to get that little statue this year? How's that going? I mean, are they going to save them for next year?
I know. Well, some of the legislation that has gotten individuals those little trophies has really created an environment of workplace chaos over the last several years. They supported, I think he's one of your favorites, but Representative Presley's added some language onto some bills back in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, that were required schools and businesses to follow federal, state, or local health guidelines to receive indemnity from or liability, freedom from liability, if you will, for individuals that contracted COVID on their property in their workplace, whatever. But, they had to follow CDC guidance or LDH guidance to receive that indemnity, which means that they had to, mask their employees or social distance their employees or send them home if they had a COVID test but weren't sick. So all of that kind of created such a workplace chaos, and it also created a tort situation too. They actually opposed one of our pieces of legislation last year, saying that it created a tort opportunity. I'm like, well, that's exactly what they did back in 2020 when they required businesses to follow these guidelines, and if they didn't, they could get sued. So anyway, yeah, lobby needs to stay in their lane.
Maybe lobby should just stop trying to control the legislature and
Yeah.
put legislators in that they want for their whatever their interests are. You said it.
Well,
Why are they in an education committee?
no,
Why are they even
that's the
there?
wrong question. That's the wrong question to ask.
Okay,
Not
what
why
is it?
are they there, it's who paid them to be there.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Because if okay, here's the deal. I've we have always seen the pharmaceutical industry as more or less a predatory industry, and they really need
Whoops. Did
Oh,
we?
that.
There you
They
are.
need.
You're back.
the
So
censorship
sorry.
bugs were kicking in.
Sorry. But they really need children. It's almost like the gender affirming, legislation. There's so much money in getting minors as lifelong customers in the pharmaceutical industry. But, children, especially in the school system, are sitting ducks because, on the one hand, we have a great exemption. Nobody's telling them about it. So it's basically a conveyor belt of customers going through the public education system. We're talking 73 doses of 24 different vaccines, if I'm not mistaken, by age 18. So, I mean, think about the money involved in school shots and whatnot. And if you're opposing any of that, you're affecting a pretty big industry. And so we're not afraid to propose and endorse legislation that would prohibit a COVID vaccine mandate for school requirement. The COVID vaccines violate statutory requirements for vaccines because COVID is not a vaccine preventable disease. Statute requires that any kind of vaccine requirement be for a vaccine preventable disease. So that's our biggest argument on that. And of course, now all the vaccines that are COVID vaccines that are available for children in that age group are once again EUA. And we can, discuss what's EUA, what's FDA approved, because that's a great. If you want to talk about that before I get off here, but they've taken all the monovalent COVID vaccines off or they removed the EUA status for all the monovalents, and all we have now are the bivalents. And so for this age group, all that's available is EUA. Now, we have been fighting LDH for 2 years now on whether or not EUA means the drug is still experimental. And we argue, because we're using the FDA's own terminology, that an emergency use authorized drug is still technically, by the FDA's own definition, still an experimental drug. So Lobby was coming to the table basically advocating for, LDH schools to require an experimental drug for school attendance. I don't know that. Hopefully they don't realize the ramifications of that they're doing it in ignorance. But if they're not, if they're fully aware of that, I mean, it needs explanation. Like, how can you advocate for something like that?
Well, for all our Republican friends who think that lobby that is this great entity, they're not. Hint, hint, they're not.
Yeah.
Well,
We've
and
had.
And their leader, I think, threw his name in the hat for governor. What's that
Yep.
guy? Waggus what? Wagga what?
Wag
Wag the
back.
dog. Isn't that his name?
Yeah, that's it. Wag the dog. That's his name.
Wags back. Yeah. Yeah. We're not endorsing him.
I'm
Oh,
not
so
either.
so that brings up a good question. So
Uh-huh.
when you say we're not endorsing him, who are
Hmm.
we being your group? Do y'all have anybody you're
Well,
endorsing?
wait a minute. You got to say which group.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
okay.
Yes, to clarify. I mean, she's all over the place.
Yeah.
Which is a compliment, by the way.
Right.
Oh, thanks. Yes, my organization, I mean, we haven't said anything. Well, I mean, we have basically, because I'm like, there's really no other candidate. I mean, we love Jeff Landry and we love Liz Muriel, I think. And I'm really irritated that anybody thinks they
Well,
deserve the position after how
well,
hard they've worked for the last 3 years.
well, look, break it down simply. Break it
Okay.
down simply. What is it that Jeff Landry, as the
Hmm.
AG, and Liz Morrell, as the Solicitor General, what is it that those two have done, since they have been in those respective offices that
Yeah.
makes them, I'm just going to break it down in common terms, high achievers? What have they done that most folks that don't pay attention to politics, that don't, I mean, why are they so deserving of being checked off to move up to the next level?
Well, first of all, they have not stopped. They have not stopped working for the citizens of this state. Because okay, so let me back up just a little bit. Back in April of 2020, we also started the grassroots movement called Reopen Louisiana, which was our effort to get the surviving members of either chamber to sign a petition. Do you guys remember that? uh, Representative Alan Seaball, we called it the Seaball petition, was the
Biscuit,
one. Yeah,
sea
yeah,
biscuit.
he's the one that initiated that effort way back in 2020, and so from that point on, we've really been. Let's see. Jeff Landry has been on our radar ever since then because he's the only individual holding statewide office. We're talking from governor to secretary of state. Well, no, I think Kyle Ardwan did some stuff in the voting issue that we appreciate in regards to health freedom stuff. Um, but as far as like lieutenant governor, treasurer, any individual holding statewide office, they remained silent on the violation of civil liberties, businesses closing. Our lieutenant governor, of course, is in charge of state parks, so he helped set up the little camps in case people needed to be quarantined at state parks. He also never took any kind of initiative when the governor was out of the country to, expire the public health emergency like we saw in other states. So Jeff Landry, Liz Muriel from day one were urging the legislature. I think I was in a meeting maybe August of 21, September, or something like that. And he was just ranting at some members of the legislature that were in the room, and also on a speakerphone. Just, this is what you guys need to do. You just need to do it. And it was he has been battling. I think the legislature. Probably leadership in the legislature, just like we have, as far as getting legislation through and whatnot. It's just been such a battle, but he has helped us, and not intentionally, but his actions have helped us by writing opinions on the vaccine law in regards to like college requirements when the mandates came down federally. he wrote not necessarily opinion, but he wrote a letter or memo. I think it's called a memo, explaining the exemption law, what's required of college students, how the exemption works. He's written a letter to the FDA after the FDA approved the monovalent or the original vaccines for children around the same time that Liz Muriel wrote a letter to the CDC director. Or maybe I got that backwards. One of them wrote to the CDC and one of them wrote to, I think, LDH in regards to the recommending the shots for children. Because, you know, Liz Muriel's son was injured. He was one of the first teens to be affected by myocarditis here in the state. So she was has, you know, gone to the table to testify about oversight that was needed in regards to vaccine injury reporting here in the state. Her son's vaccine injury, I think she had to report. And because the drugs are experimental, you know, medical providers, vaccine providers are supposed to be filing those VAERS reports. LDH had a wonky system, an 800 number that supposedly they were doing it. I mean, it was just so convoluted. But anyway, they have, from between reopening the state, the vaccine mandates, the mask mandates, they provided a religious exemption and a philosophical exemption when the mask mandates came out. And schools rejected them, by the way. Schools had the opportunity to accept those exemptions that the AG's office put out, and they rejected them. The inside scoop on that, let me tell you about that. You have a minute?
Have a few.
Okay. So I need to write a book, but I spoke to a school superintendent because that's, you know, the mask issue has been on our radar from like day one. It's been a thorn in my side for 3 years. But I spoke with the school superintendent and I asked them, I was like, if you think back to the governor's executive order, there were exemptions that he offered in his executive order. If you're eating, if you're drinking, if you're talking, public speaking, that kind of thing. And he also had one in there for if you have a problem breathing or something like that with a mask on.
Yep.
I'm like, hello. Everybody that wears a mask has a problem breathing, especially children. So I had an opportunity to talk to a school superintendent one afternoon. A legislature kind of coordinated the conversation. She was hoping that I could convince him of the error of his ways. And through that conversation, I asked him, you know, how did you determine what you would accept as in regards to, you know, like medical exemptions for masking and what you wouldn't accept for exemptions? And he stated they went by the state law for vaccinations. That's how they established the their policy, basically, because they would accept a very few medical exemptions for the masking. For I didn't hear very many, but some schools did accept medical exemptions. But you know, our vaccine exemption is pretty liberal. All you have to do is send in a written dissent and you can opt out of a vaccine. And so I asked him, I'm like, well, you know, individuals like myself, I have an issue, you know, biblically with, you know, wearing a mask. I don't want to bear false witness. Masking historically have always been, you know, source control for individuals that are sick. I'm like, I'm not sick. I'm not going to put on a mask. I'm not going to bear false witness. I'm not going to, you know, stir up or stoke up fear in my neighbor, because scripture again tells us to do not fear. So why aren't you accepting a religious exemption or just a written dissent if you're going by the state's exemption law? And he said, well, we just opted to just take a medical exemption. And so if you've been following what's been happening, especially recently in Mississippi, where a judge in Mississippi has ruled, because Mississippi has never had a religious exemption for vaccinations for school attendance. It's only been medical for decades. All they've accepted are medical exemptions in Mississippi. And this judge a federal judge over in Mississippi just heard that case in front of his court, and he has deemed that if a school will accept a secular exemption, which is basically your medical exemption, then they have to accept a religious exemption. A secular exemption is not covered. It's not a, a constitutionally protected civil liberty.
Right.
But religious exemption is. And so our state's superintendents, those individuals that determined what was acceptable and what wasn't, determined that a religious exemption was not acceptable for masking, violating everyone's constitutionally protected right of freedom of religious expression.
Well, the problem, and I've said this before with that is, if, let's say, the kid doesn't want to wear the mask, goes to school, says religious exemption, they say, oh, well, tough, go home. What does the kid have to do then? His parents have to sue.
Exactly. Exactly. So if anybody ever wants to sue, you can have all of my emails. I have so many communications with people, not all of my emails. I don't want to put that offer. I take back my offer. You can't have all of my emails, but emails in regards to like my public records request in regards to show me the safety of masking. I mean, I've got so many receipts, you guys. I've done a public records request of the CDC saying, show me the safety studies on masking children, for 2, 4, 8 hours a day.
Well, but my point is, and it's not just, sorry, Duke, didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's not just the requesting of public information and the, oh, show me this and prove to me that. You literally have to file a lawsuit, because what are you going to do? Yep. They try to go to school, don't wear their mask. They call the sheriff's department or the SRO or the local PD or whatever. People get arrested, blah, 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 and they still end up having to sue and then have to deal with that. So I'm just saying, they make it, while it may be illegal to do that or unconstitutional to do that, you still got to make sure that you're willing to go through the fight to prove that you're right.
Exactly. You got to go the distance. We got to find a good plaintiff. Of course, there's no cause of action at the moment because we don't have a mask mandate. It really needed to be done. And I think there was a lawsuit down in South Louisiana. But again, you have to have the right argument. You have to have, it can't just be, oh, this is a violation of religious freedom. You have to have a solid argument in front of the right judge.
Well, it's very similar to Second Amendment rights and Second Amendment lawsuits. You have to have the right lawyers, you have to have the right judges, you have to have the right case, and so on and so forth, and the right funding.
Well, and from the standpoint of the school system, I mean, the deck's stacked against us. The majority of the school systems across the state of Louisiana have the same dadgum law firm, partnered up with John Bel Edwards, the Democrat governor, who was going to back the play of the Louisiana Department of Health at every single turn. And, it's our local school boards that are enabling that law firm to steer them in the direction that they're going. So for folks that are watching the show, if you want to make a difference, you need to demand of your school boards that they look at things more seriously and take it in a different direction. Like, consider hiring a freaking local lawyer from your parish.
Yeah.
There's a thought, I'm sure there's a ton of lawyers that would love to get in it, and have a piece of the pie. Why not?
For sure. For sure.
Okay. So, obviously, like you said, we have no mask mandate now. I mean, we hear reports in the news media that there could be a second rise of Omicron, and somehow it sounds like a Transformer movie. But anyway, and all that. But I want to circle back to this censorship deal.
Oh, yeah.
And change gears back to that, because that's kind of what we originally started talking about. So I've got this video queued up of Representative Ralph Norman, I believe it is here. Let me switch screens. And let's watch this for a second. I think it's about a minute and a half.
Consequences. There has been no accountability, and there will be no change to the things that my good friend from Colorado outlined to you. The censorship, the continual denial of science, the continual politicization of medicine, until there are consequences. Unless there are consequences, I get it that we all want to move past this, understand what happened so it doesn't happen again. but it's continuing to happen. And we're rewarding the people that did it. What do you say to people that lost their loved ones because some policymaker, and I get you don't want to ascribe motive. I get that clearly from your comment. You don't know the motive, right? We don't know what's in people's hearts. But there has to be a consequence. There has to be an accountability for abject, especially when there are life and death issues, especially at this scale. And I would just say, and maybe this is a question you can't answer, and maybe you don't want to get into this, but if you're unwilling to say something about this, if you folks are unwilling to say something about this, this is going to continue, and it's going to be used against us over and over and over again. Thank you.
So I think he puts it pretty succinctly right there, that until something happens to them, the people in charge that are making the rules are benevolent overlords, until there are consequences, real consequences that hit them basically in the pocketbook, that there is no accountability. All they got to do is they'll come up with the next scare tactic, push it out in the media, scare the hell out of everybody, and then it'll go on for a year or two, just like, I mean, I go back to the thing, and I don't want to drag this out, but I go back to the thing that let's see, when did COVID really start? Into 2019, beginning of 2020? Is that when it really hit? Okay. So if you would have gone back to the middle of 2019, before it ever became a thing, and you would have said, we're going to shut down the majority, I would argue, of business in this country, or a large percentage of it. We're going to close schools. We're going to this is going to be like 9/11 all over again, except we're going to stretch it out for 6 months. I would have said you were crazy.
For 3 years.
Yeah, and yet that's exactly what happened, and we all, I'm including all of us and viewers and all, we all fell for it.
Yeah.
I mean, some of us were fighting back, obviously, but at least in the beginning, we all fell for it, lock, stock, and barrel. So how do we prevent that again?
Well, we actually have some legislation that's going before Health and Welfare tomorrow morning that's intended to prevent what happened before from happening again, because it's another one of my beefs. I'm like, we've had this is our 4th legislative session since COVID hit, and we are still in a position that it could happen again. Like, we have, nutty people still in office. We haven't replaced, well, we got rid of one of our leadership at Louisiana Department of Health. Our secretary resigned. I want to talk about that too, by the way. But we literally have not done anything to prevent what happened in 2020 from happening again. I'm talking about the loss of civil liberties, closing our businesses, masking our children, usurpation of parental rights. I mean, all of it. Nothing is in place to prevent it from happening again. But we did present some legislation to Representative Kathy Evanston, and she is presenting it again. It's kind of had a crazy ride over the last couple of weeks, but she's presenting it again in Health and Welfare tomorrow morning, and it is intended to prevent some of what happened from happening again. It's we call it the CDC WHO bill, but it would prevent the state of Louisiana and any of its entities, state, local, school boards, you name it. It would prevent any kind of state or local public entity from adopting CDC guidance, from following through with any kind of CDC or World Health Organization, that's the other part of it too, from adopting any of their requirements, mandates, any of that. And they could not use the CDC recommendations as justification for a mask, vaccination, or a medical testing requirement. Because that's, another one of my beefs. You guys have shared my letter that I wrote to the Bossier board way back in July of 2020, when Bossier was fixing to adopt guidelines from Louisiana Department of Health, but they were guidelines that were basically issued through the CDC without anybody verifying if they had any validity. So this would stop, this legislation that's being heard tomorrow would stop the state from adopting CDC guidance, just, rubber stamping it without any kind of evaluation of whether or not it was valid, if it was accurate, if it was safety tested. That was our argument the whole time. Show us that this is safe, especially when you're talking about children. Show us that what you're implementing in regards to COVID mitigation is safe. And none of that was ever done. Again, I have the public records request for that.
Jill, not to minimize exactly what you're saying, but aren't we talking about a more simpler problem here overall with everything, from censorship to vaccinations to mask, all this crap? And I mean, aren't we talking about the fact that too many of us we're just deferring to some unknown person to
Yeah.
make a life decision on our behalf that has consequences, and we're not even considering, the ramifications of that unknown person making that decision? Aren't we just deferring our responsibility to humanity?
Yes. Yes, exactly. I thought you were fixing to say, aren't we lemmings? And yes, too many of us were lemmings. We did not question. We just went along with it. That's been our tagline for 3 years now, is do not comply. If there were enough of us that just said no, and made our neighbors think a little bit, but we did. We just kind of went along. We didn't do our due diligence.
Well, our elected officials, to me,
Yeah,
they are just submitting. They are.
ex-
They're not fighting. I mean, we keep. I'm sorry, I got to say this because it was on my mind even before you came on the show. I'd been thinking about this because one of the things, there's a couple of points. One, there's two types of elected officials, and it's all of us who are doing this. We're electing the people that
yeah,
they sound good to us. They sound good. They make a good speech and they
mhm,
sound good to us. But you know what? They get down there and they're not fighters. We have some
yep,
fighters. Don't get me wrong. We have some. We do. But
yeah,
we're electing people that just make a good speech, and they're not
yep,
people who getting in the trenches and doing the fighting. And that's because we, the voters, people, are taking the easy path of just hoping somebody else is going to do it for us, and whoever sounds the best at it, and we're not doing our homework, we're not digging in. The other thing
eh,
is I want to compliment you. I want to say thank you for working as hard as what you're doing. And I know that because here's the thing. How nice would it be to just check out and go to the Kane Brown concert, or, you know, go out every weekend and, go out with friends and not be working. How nice would that be? Rather than
that'd be
like,
pretty nice.
it'd be pretty nice, wouldn't it? But
Yeah,
the thing is there's a few people, a minority of people that are
mhm,
holding the line in our society,
yeah,
and there's a majority of people that y'all are going to the Kane Brown concert having a good time while your civil liberties are being eroded. I mean, you're losing, and the problem is unfortunately, you're not going to freaking wake up from your sleep until it arrives at your front doorstep with
yep.
cuffs, a gun, or whatever, and then you're going to be, how did this happen? How did this happen? And you know what? You need to freaking go look in the mirror. I'm sorry, I had to get that off my chest. But to you, I want to say thank you.
Thanks, Duke. I appreciate that. Do, because it's been a rough 3 years. I can't remember if I told you, but I don't think I've had a day off since February 5th of 2020. It's
There's
been
no way you could have your hands in everything that you do and you not be working your butt off. And I appreciate that, and I respect the hell out of you for it. And
oh, thanks so
if
much.
Well,
nobody else says thank you, I am saying thank you. Just so you
yeah, and
know.
I want to say thank you too, but so let me ask you, do you have, I mean, what else do you do for a living, or is this what you do full time, or do you have a small business you try to run? I mean,
No. Okay, so my official job ends on Saturday. My daughter graduates, and this is, I think, my 15th year as a homeschool mom. So
ah,
my daughter graduates Saturday from high school. So my job is officially ending. But as far as like what I do for a living, I'm a mom, first of all, and then an advocate second. But I have, we have Health Freedom Louisiana, but we intentionally do not get paid for what we do. So we do all of our advocacy as volunteers. We took a look at the state's lobbying laws when we set up our business back in 2019, and we didn't want to be considered lobbyists. And to be a lobbyist in the state of Louisiana, you have to get paid. So we said, well, okay, we won't get paid. But I mean, but we have such small overhead. All we really have is a website, a PO box. So we take donations for getting us to and from the Capitol, the printed material that we provide to legislators and committee. Now we have had some additional funding, like last year we had a donation, so we started a billboard project trying to educate people about the vaccine exemptions, about the physicians' responsibility to report VAERS data, and making pharmaceutical companies liable again. That's one of our goals, is to make pharma liable, because we think that this drives what we've been through the last couple of years, the fact that they're not held liable for the injuries that are associated with their products. We think they should be liable.
Right.
So we had an education campaign for that, but we kind of put a halt to it because we needed to reserve those funds for a lawsuit. We started helping raise funds for Danielle Bunch and her lawsuit against the governor. Hopefully you guys are familiar with that, because because the way it stands, if it stands the way it is, her court case was dismissed by the judge, and they are appealing. But the judge determined that the governor had the right to close her business, to force mask on her employees. And we can't let that stand. That's a horrible precedent, that the governor would have the authority to do that. So she needed some funding for appeal. We did some real quick fundraising for her through our social media and our Substack, that we an article platform that we publish, and we were able to raise some funds. And her attorney, Jeff Wittenbrink, who's an amazing attorney, he only asked to pay for her previous legal fees, and going forward, all he has asked that we pay for her court filings. So we've raised enough funds to pay like the initial court filings. So we're reserving our education funds that we were gifted with last year, in case we needed to pay for any of her for her court fees. But I think we were able to raise enough money to get her through a couple of court proceedings. But that we could not let that judge's ruling stand. It's an awful precedent. It would basically allow the governor to do exactly what he did before again. So anyway, we have really small overhead. We just, every now and again we come out with our hands out saying, can you help us? Because, I have a 7-hour round trip drive to the Capitol. Gas is not cheap right now.
Right.
So, so
yeah,
that's,
well, and I'll make sure and put a link, I guess, to your Louisiana Health Freedom Alliance website or whatever when the show's over. And so, instead of sending us some coffee money or whatever tonight, we would recommend that all the viewers go send Jill a little gas money so she can
Thank
keep
you.
going back down to Baton Rouge and making those
Yeah.
trips, because you're literally doing what we always tell people we need to do. You're being an activist in a good way. You're putting your own money where your mouth is, with
Yeah.
help from other people every now and then, but
Yeah.
you're getting it done. You're literally in the middle of this. I mean, we just sit here every Tuesday night and, go on social media and rant and rave for a little while, but you're actually doing it.
And it doesn't have to be that way. If more people would step up and just take an action on a little bit, and it's not even hard actions, like Jill, just like you put out or have been putting out calls for folks, to email their legislators on issues. And does that work? Do they read those emails? Do they listen to that? I think they do.
I would like to think they do. And of course, with our advocacy portal, it allows people to, put in their own personal message. So it's not necessarily just our message that's going out. We really want people to put in their own personal message when we give them the opportunity to send a message to legislators. But we've been doing phenomenal as far as getting people engaged. Like thousands of emails have been going out to committees. And so we're really excited about that. And I understand how people have busy lives. They cannot know everything that I
That's right.
know in regards to the subjects that I'm familiar with. I just look at my husband. I mean, he doesn't have time to invest in, educating himself the way I have in regards to, vaccinations and civil liberties and all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm happy to put the material in front of individuals to make advocacy easier on them. We have to. We have to make it easier for individuals to engage their government. Otherwise, it won't get
Yeah,
done. We lead busy lives.
that is exactly right. So when can we rest? When are we finally going to win?
Okay, so I, I don't want to. I don't want to put hope in any kind of individual or any government. We win when we realize that we are the government. That the buck stops with us, and eventually that we are the ones that are culpable for what has happened. We let this happen. We let this
That's
happen.
right.
So
Well, I would argue that it's a never-ending battle because, I mean, we've been fighting this literally the whole life of our nation,
yeah,
and I don't
yeah,
think it will ever actually be done because people are always going to have an ulterior motive.
yeah,
And just as much as you're fighting for what we consider to be the right things, other people are fighting for what they consider to be the right things or their self-serving things. There's always going to
yeah,
be that clash. So, Duke, it's a never-ending battle.
It is a never-ending battle, but the accountability that we all say we want, it all falls back to more than just a minority of people. It falls back to everybody. And just like what Jill said, when we all finally wake up and realize that, we're responsible for our own outcome, and people, they don't even have to take a lot of action. Just a little bit of action will go so far. It spreads the burden out. It doesn't fall on the shoulders of just a few people. And then, you know what? We can all go to the Kane Brown concert. Not just a few of us. We can all do it.
yeah. I want to go. Who's Kane Brown? I don't even know who that is.
Truth of the matter, I don't know. He's some country and western singer. And I got to tell you, I was out walking the street. Somebody in the comments asked earlier how the term limits thing was going. And I'll tell you, it was going good till I was throwing stuff out there on the street in Bossier City because I seen some people who'd made commitments to help with the term limits, project, who they're living it up, going and having a good time on the weekends, and they're all piling it up at the Kane Brown concert. And I'm like, man, that sure would be nice to be able to go do something like that while I'm out here sweating, all this humidity, getting all these signatures. And the truth of the matter is, they're the people that are going to benefit the most from it. And
Yep.
they can't take the time to throw their hat out there and to help. But you know what? That's fine. Some people talk, other people do. There's two types of people in life. There's talkers and doers.
Doers.
And
Yep.
We'll stop
We
right there.
In my
we
defense, I did not go to the Kane Brown concert, although I did go fishing, so I guess that's just as bad. Here, Duke's worn out 3 or 4 pairs of shoes already, and I just got my sneakers dirty one evening.
Well, there have been some folks that are helping on that project, and we are almost there. In fact, before 30 minutes before we came on the show, I was literally walking a street in Boulder City, and I was getting signatures before I ran in here to come do this show.
good for you.
And we are almost there, and we're going to get it done.
That's awesome.
Okay. All right. So anything else, Jill, you want to share? Or?
Sure. Oh yeah, real quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I alluded to the Secretary of Health, Dr. Courtney Phillips, a little while ago, and I just want to share with you all because I think I was on here talking about my little project to um, well, get them fired. I've had a hate relationship with Louisiana Department of Health for 3 years now, and it's been kind of a personal goal of mine to get Phillips and Cantor out of those positions as Secretary of Health and State Health Officer. But back in March, we did some work. Public records requests to find out, if and when or where and when any kind of FDA approved COVID vaccine had been distributed in the state of Louisiana. A similar public records request had been submitted a year ago, 22 of, I think, March of 22. So we did the same thing. Back in 22, it had never been distributed. No FDA approved COVID vaccine had been distributed in March or February of 22. So we did the exact same wording as a public records request. When and where was an FDA approved COVID vaccine distributed in the state of Louisiana? And it came back. I wrote an article about it. You can go to our Substack and read it. And I shared screenshots of it. But it came back saying that FDA approved EUA COVID vaccines have been available, forever. And I'm like, they're calling FDA approved COVID vaccines as EUA vaccines. And I'm like, that don't work. That dog don't hunt. You can't have an FDA approved EUA COVID vaccine. It's not the way it works. So we filed a formal complaint with the FDA and letting them know that the Louisiana Department of Health has been, providing literally false information to the citizens of the state for going on 2.5 years in regards to these vaccines. They're saying that FDA approved vaccines, that EUA vaccines are FDA approved. And all of the literature, the fact sheet for providers, the fact sheet for patients, all of it says that you have to tell the patient that what they're receiving is an EUA drug. It is not FDA approved. And all this time, LDH has been telling citizens of the state that what they're getting is an FDA approved product.
Well, look. So somebody listening to what you just said, they're saying, "Well, if I got that and I have a side effect, I'll just sue the state, right? And I'll get a big old check." But what they don't understand is you may even get a judge to give you a settlement. But then how do you get that check? How does that come?
That's an interest. I'm glad you asked that because,
I know the answer already, but I wanted to hear you say it.
Under the PrEP Act, you can't sue. You can't sue because it's an EUA drug. You can't sue. If it was FDA approved, you could sue the manufacturer. But we haven't had an FDA approved product here in the state. EUA drugs are still covered under PrEP. So EUA stands for Emergency Use Authorized, meaning that the vaccine manufacturer, the administering physician or pharmacist, all the government entities that are suppliers, they coordinate the distribution throughout the state. All of those individuals are indemnified under PrEP. They can't be sued. Now, my argument is there's a caveat in PrEP that says if they act with, I think it's called willful negligence, is the phrase that they use. And in my opinion, I'm not an attorney. In my opinion, calling an EUA drug FDA approved is willful negligence. So we submitted a formal complaint with the FDA around March 22nd. We published all of it in a Substack article on Friday, I think it was March 30th or 31st. And the following Monday, I think it was Monday or Tuesday the following week, Secretary of Health Phillips announced her resignation. So I don't know if we had anything to do with it, but I'll take any kind of credit I can get for that. And she went out with such a, I mean, it wasn't a bang at all. It was a little whimper. She announced her resignation like on a Monday, and her final day was that Thursday. The governor put out a statement. There was no social media, goodbye or anything like that. There was no long farewell. She announced it, and maybe 3 or 4 days later, she was gone.
That's odd.
Wow.
Yeah. I thought so
Wow.
too. I thought so too.
You never know.
So now my goal is to get Cantor fired. Let's see if we can do it. He only has a few months anyway. He's gone, whenever we get a new governor. But I would, with the legislation that we have going through right now that would prevent COVID vaccinations from being required for school attendance. My argument is that they've acted outside of their legal authority by granting approval for, first of all, it's an EUA drug, so it's an experimental drug for school attendance. But COVID, again, is not a vaccine preventable disease, and statute is specific that any kind of vaccine requirements be for a vaccine preventable disease. And so we've known all along that this vaccine does not prevent transmission or infection. And he has known that. And so, he granted approval for 86 charter schools in the city of New Orleans to require COVID vaccination for children as young as 5. As young as 5, 10 days after he testified in a legislative hearing saying that they would not require it while it was EUA. That was December 6th. He testified in front of a committee hearing saying they would not require it while it was still EUA. 10 days later, on December 16th, they granted approval for 86 schools in the city of New Orleans to require COVID vaccination for school attendance.
How are we ever going to have accountability? Because some of these people, you can't tell me there's no way they didn't know the harm that they were causing and they continued on with it. I mean, how are we going to ever have accountability? How are we going to have it? I mean, I don't think our politicians are going to do it.
Well,
How's it going to happen?
People have to go to jail. There has to be real accountability, and that's never going to happen because they're not going to put themselves in jail.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful that eventually we have a legislature. I'm talking about the entire thing, not just individuals, but a legislature with the spine. And of course, I do see a light at the end of the tunnel with a new governor coming in next year. Hopefully it will be Jeff Landry, because I think he has envisioned, cleaning house at Louisiana Department of Health. I had the opportunity to introduce him to a physician here in Louisiana who's done a lot of research on the COVID vaccine and actually sits on Governor DeSantis's new health integrity board. So he sits on, Florida's new board, but he lives here in Louisiana and does research on the COVID vaccines. So I had an opportunity to introduce him to A.G. Landry a couple of weeks ago at an event that we all spoke at. And so he seemed really interested in kind of creating a team to take on that issue whenever if and when he becomes governor.
Well, there's another reason to consider Jeff Landry for governor.
Yes. When you were talking about people that have fought from the beginning, he is one of them, and Liz Murrill, both of them, highly recommend.
Well, and my litmus test for that is real easy. He's continued to fight for the stupid Cypress district, or to fight against the stupid Cypress district up here. Let me rephrase that. And so if he's sticking to his guns with that, that's pretty much good enough for me.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that issue. You'll have to tell me about it sometime, Rex.
Oh yeah, we have covered it ad nauseum on the show, and
Oh,
there's still more to
sorry.
go coming up in the future, but we'll get to all that. But anyway, so
And in addition, Liz is actually supposed to come on the show in one of the next couple of shows coming up, and really look forward to that. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her personally, but
Yeah.
I'm excited about that one.
You'll love her. I just love Liz Murrell. She is so down to earth. I mean, she has 4 boys, so she knows how to, play tough, if you will. I just think the world of her. She's done so much for us, and I think I've mentioned to you guys before. I've sent her a text at like 9:30 at night, having a question about a COVID vaccine mandate for college, for a nursing student, and she replied within 5 minutes. So. I mean, to me, a lot of people, that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're asking a question, when someone's being denied access to education for, something as ridiculous as a vaccine that doesn't prevent, transmission or infection. And if we have someone in that position that's willing to answer a question at 9:30 at night, it speaks a lot of her, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I'll
no
agree
doubt
with that.
about it.
Okay, Mr. Lowry.
Well, I'm done. Unless Jill's got another topic she wants to hit on. She could go all night. I mean, she's into so many different things. She could never talk about the same thing for 30 minutes. She could keep going and going and going.
Well, let me tell you real quickly, and I won't keep you too long, because then, do you guys go to bed pretty early? Like right about now, my husband's like yawning, headed to bed,
Oh,
but he
well,
wakes up at the crack of dawn. So.
normally our show goes on till 9, 9:30, 9:15. So
Oh,
anyway.
wow. Okay, well, I won't keep you that long. But tomorrow we have 3 bills in committee I want to tell you about. We have the WHO CDC bill that I mentioned earlier. It's being reheard. We just wrote a Substack article about that. My other co-director, Fiorella, wrote a really funny article about that. But we are supporting it now. We supported it originally. We actually provided the language to the legislator, Representative Edmiston, that's putting it in. And then it got hijacked and really awful language got substituted in. And through like a series of freakish events, lack of public comment and a public meeting, they're having to rehear the bill again. And we have managed to kind of collaborate with Woody Jenkins and come up with some really good language on the CDC WHO bill. So that's being heard in the morning. We've got the No Patient Left Alone bill is in our Senate hearing, Senate Health and Welfare hearing tomorrow. And that again is another piece of legislation that when we made it over to the Senate Health and Welfare side, we say that's the committee where all good bills go to die. And sure enough, Senator Leno and Senator Fred Mills kind of made comments about, language in it, and it was just ridiculous. But come to find out, there are places in statute where it does guarantee a patient's right to have visitation in the hospitals, and that really needs to be explored sometime soon, because I don't know if they've amended it recently, like in the last year in the last legislative session, or if this was existing statute and it just wasn't followed over the last several years, because I'm sure you guys are familiar or have heard stories of individuals that were denied access to their loved ones while they were in a nursing home or a hospital. And so there's already existing statute for some of this information that we were trying to put into statute, and they brought it to our attention. So tomorrow we're introducing some amendments to the legislation that we introduced that will kind of align with what's already in statute. So that's a bill that's in committee tomorrow. We're hoping it just kind of goes through without a hitch. We understand that the Senate committee is in support of it. It didn't feel that way last week when it was being heard, but they want this to pass as much as we do. They understand the need for it. And then we also have a bill that we're opposed to. We have one bill that we're adamantly opposed to this year, and that we call it the pharmacy bill. This is the third year we fought it off. It's one of the few times that we're in agreement with Representative Thomas Presley. So, but it expands access to vaccinations in pharmacies, and it allows pharmacy techs and pharmacy interns to administer all vaccinations to children as young as 7. Currently, only pharmacists are allowed to administer flu shots to individuals 17 and older. And so our argument, of course, is that, more access does not mean it's more safe. It actually means it's less safe because, as I mentioned earlier, without adding the COVID shots into it, there's 73 doses of, I think, 24 different vaccines that are on the recommended schedule. And so a physician supposedly has more information about that, also has the equipment necessary in-house in case there is a severe reaction to a vaccination. And of course, now that they've added COVID to the mix, COVID, the vaccines have never gone through a clinical trial in combination with another vaccine. So if you're adding COVID to, say, a DTaP or a flu shot, none of that has been studied in a clinical trial. So the opportunity for adverse reactions are, basically limitless. So
you're
our argument is keep that in a physician's office.
Yeah, so you're saying that bill is trying to promote a pharmacist basically acting as a physician.
Exactly.
That's the bottom line here. I mean, good
Exactly.
grief.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see them knowing the indications and contraindications, but I mean, basically you're creating another doctor's office, and it ain't got to
Exactly.
be a doctor.
And there's so many other issues, like you're not supposed to be administered a vaccine with a fever. Are they going to be checking for a fever? Are they going to be checking for a family history? If you've had a first degree sibling or a relative that's had a reaction, then you need to be cautious about which vaccines that you are administered. So is that happening at the corner drugstore? We kind of feel that it's not. And interestingly enough, one of our members just recently, like April 24th, I want to say, witnessed an adverse reaction in a CVS. An individual was being, given a vaccine. They had to call the first responders. I think she said the fire trucks were the first ones that made it there. So, how do you, when you're dealing with children, I mean, granted, an adult's going to take on that risk, but parents need to be aware, do they have defibrillators there if someone has, an anaphylactic shock or something like that? What's available in your corner drugstore that, should be in the physician's office? So, so our opposition to it is, we don't want anybody to be denied a medical, choice that they want within means, but because we are in support of Representative Gabe Ferment's minor gender affirming care bill. But in regards to vaccinations, if a parent wants to get their child vaccine, great, but we would love for them to do that in a physician's office under medical care, so that if they do experience an adverse reaction afterward, they have a physician that they can go back to and receive adequate care for it, and also have it reported as it's supposed to be by law.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, good job. And I am glad y'all are opposing that. I would be right there with you. No doubt.
Thank you very much.
So
I guess that's all I have.
Anything else?
I think that's it. I'm going to take a day or two off with my daughter graduating this weekend. I'm heading back to Reston tomorrow after we get done in committee tomorrow morning. And so I'm taking a couple of days off. My son-in-law actually just graduated from college today, back in Georgia. And so he and my daughter are driving in, and my son and his daughter are driving in. We're going to take a couple of days off and enjoy my baby graduating from high school.
Yeah, well, congratulations on all the graduations, so to speak.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks again, Jill, for coming on, and thank you for all the work that you do. I mean, folks don't say thank you enough, but look, I mean it. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It is
My pleasure. My
Yeah,
pleasure. Thank you
like
guys.
the
I appreciate it.
Energizer Bunny, you just keep going and going and going.
No,
It's great.
I don't know about that. I would love some energy.
Yeah. All right.
that.
Well, we'll let you sign off, Miss Jill, and we'll look forward to seeing you the next time with more interesting news, I'm sure. And glad to have you back on anytime.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, guys. It was great chatting with you.
All right.
Bye
See you
bye, Jill.
later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, never a dull moment and always interesting information from Jill Hines.
I'll tell you, she is on fire. She has got
Well,
her
and she
hands
knows
in the
it.
middle.
Look, she knows her stuff.
She knows her stuff. I mean, I told you, I think ultimately she may be the most consequential guest that we have had on our show. People may not realize it or not, but the fights that she's in, the things she's fighting for and doing, I mean, it's things that move the needle that a lot of people are bored and don't want to have anything to do with. I mean, but she, yeah, David Womack, she is on point. She's the tip of the spear. That's it.
Yeah. Well, and I'll throw a few little curveballs to her every now and then, and she just bats them right back out of the park. So, good job, Jill.
You
All
got that
right.
right.
Do you have anything else that you would like to share with our guest, Mr. Lowry?
That's all I
this-
got.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have much on the city council or the police jury this week. There is some stuff building up, and Jill, of course, was an excellent guest, and that does apply here locally as well. All the stuff she was talking about, even though some of it's statewide, of course, that applies locally because, well, we're in the state too.
Well, it's a call to action on the things that she's talking about. You've got legislation that's going on right now, and y'all think that maybe your email may not be consequential and may not move the needle, but I'm telling you, your email or your action, while it may seem small, it has an effect. So don't let up. Pick a bill, pick an issue, learn about the issue, and stay on top of it. Let the legislators hear about it. I mean, it matters. It makes a difference. It does.
Well stated, Mr. Lowry. And speaking of emails and making a difference, if you have something you want to share to us, our Proton Mail's been a little quiet the last week or two, but if you have something you want to share, go make a free protonmail.com account. Don't put any identifying information in it. Send us an email to bosierwatch@protonmail.com. We do read those and get a lot of interesting information and leads off of what comes through the Proton Mail. If you want to go over to the website, bosierwatch.com or .org, it doesn't matter. You can donate button if you want to donate some coffee money there or buy a coffee mug or anything like that. Like I always say every week, doesn't matter. We're going to keep on doing the show, whether you donate or not.
Yeah, that's right. Have a good evening, Rex.
Adios, amigo.